Welcome to That 30s Show, a podcast where we talk about the good, the bad, and the surprising parts of our 30s. I'm G, and I'm finally 30. I'm excited to find out if 30 really is the new 20, because if it is, then the best years are yet to come.
And I'm David. I'm entering my mid-30s. I used to have no back pain or trouble sleeping, but now I live off a healthy diet of self-help books and dream of being in bed by 10 p.m. every night. Join us each week as we try to figure out together what life in your 30s is all about.
Welcome back to That 30 Show.
Welcome back, everyone, and I am really excited. I'm always usually pretty excited, but I think this episode is special.
Yeah.
And you know why? It's because this episode, if you're listening on the day it's released, it's February 5th. I can't pronounce that very well. Anyway, February 5th, 2024.
Yep.
Which means that it's almost exactly 1 year ago that we published our first podcast episode to Spotify.
Yay! We need to insert that little noise. But yeah, it's our podiversary. Like,
it's a podiversary. Yeah, is that
1
a word?
year.
Now it is.
It is now.
Happy podiversary. I feel like we should pop some champagne in.
I know. I know. It's an exciting
totally
time.
Grab a drink. You should grab a drink. Do you have some wine at home? Pour yourself a glass.
I've got water, so.
Okay, got water. Okay.
Yeah, I know. It's very exciting. Yeah, I think our first episode was released January 6th. So
it's
exactly
February 6th.
February 6th. So it's exactly 1 year. Yeah.
Yeah, February 6th, 2023, we released our first episode, and it's been a year. Obviously, we haven't been releasing weekly episodes every year, but this is episode number 41.
Yeah.
41 episodes.
42, I think.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or 43. I don't know. we've got a few.
Oh, you're right, because
I think it's 43.
Yeah, we're recording this
in advance.
In advance.
Yeah.
So wait. We got to get this right. I want to know.
I think this is episode 43. This will be 43.
42, 43. It is. Oh my gosh. So 43 episodes.
So we recorded 42 episodes in 1 year. And considering there's how many weeks are there? 52? That's a lot of episodes that we uploaded.
Yeah. Let's give ourselves a pat on the back.
I'm so proud of us. Good job, David.
So it's going to be a somewhat self-indulgent episode, but at the same time, I think that it will hopefully be interesting too, because we want to kind of share our thoughts and reflections and things we've learned on just the whole process, the creative process, the logistical process. If anyone is interested to start a podcast or just do any sort of, regular creative project in partnership with a friend or a colleague or something like that, maybe our insights or reflections might be interesting or apply to you. It's kind of like a tagline like, oh, I started a podcast 1 year ago. Here are the things that we've learned.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's going to be a reflective, but hopefully insightful episode. I'm curious what your takeaways are. I don't have any idea what you might have to say.
Yeah.
And I also have a quick list of some of the episodes that have particular significance for me that I want to quickly sort of reflect on and highlight as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's fun to be able to reflect on everything that we've talked about over the past year. Have been so many topics. We've had a lot of guests on, and I think we did one episode where we did some reflection, maybe mid-year. But I don't know about you, but sometimes I do go back and listen to some of our first few episodes, and I'm I do notice that we've gotten more comfortable talking on the podcast and speaking and interviewing people. So it's pretty cool to see.
It is. So what do you want to start? I don't think we have any structure to. I just have a lot of different points to sort of bring up. Do you want to?
Okay. Well, why don't you
take it?
I was going to say, why don't you go for one of your points? Okay. Yeah.
Well, when I sat down and I'm asking myself, okay, Dave, what do I think? What are my reflections? What are my lessons learned? The first thing that came to mind is the concept of the hedonic treadmill and how that applies to this podcast for me.
Okay.
Do you know the hedonic treadmill, what that means?
No.
Oh, so the hedonic treadmill is just basically the term for how in life, no matter how high you go in terms of uh, your happiness or your joy, if you win the lottery or anything like that, you get
Mm-hmm.
engaged. Um, you always just fall back pretty quickly to a baseline level of happiness, for lack of a better word, no matter what's happened, because you get used to it, right? Let's say your income doubles and you're like, oh my gosh, I can start eating at 5-star restaurants every month. Well, after a few months, you just kind of get used to it and it doesn't feel that special anymore.
Hmm.
Um, like for example, we talked about a few episodes ago how as our incomes have slowly increased,
Mm-hmm.
as our careers have progressed, you start buying drinks at restaurants, but you didn't used to. But maybe you
Yeah.
sort of it's quite familiar, that experience. It doesn't have the same novelty or the same oomph to it as it
Yeah.
might
Yeah.
used to
Yeah.
when you first started. Like, ooh, let me order a cocktail, and
Yeah.
now you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, I do that.
Yeah. So at this point, you're feeling that about the podcast. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's both it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's certainly, it's an observation, right? Because think back to our first episode, at least for myself, and I think for you too, when the first episode was successfully published on Spotify, right? It was
Yeah.
so surreal to
Yeah.
open up that app and see our original creative production, the amazing artwork that you created, and just it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like it's public, and it's like
For sure.
it's one of the podcasts that just looks like all the other podcasts I listen to, and it was
Yeah.
so rewarding. And early on, I would refresh. I remember every day. You remember that I kept
Yes,
messaging
I
you,
was
and
just
you're
gonna
like,
say that. Yeah, that you were on it with like the stats or like who has been viewing, how our audience size, everything like that. You got really excited about that, I remember.
yeah, like I was obsessively checking the stats and like how many listens, how many downloads. I would do that multiple times a day. I do that maybe once every 2 months now.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like it's it's become a very familiar process, which is both good, I think, because it means that I'm more comfortable, I'm more confident. But it's just an interesting reflection that I think no matter what happens, right? Like you just kind of get used to it
Hmm.
um, over time. So it's a process now, doing these weekly episodes, uploading, editing, talking to you about it, interviewing guests, etc. That is very um, familiar, and it's not
Hmm.
anything special. Like people ask me when they catch up, oh David, how's it going? How's your podcast? I'm like, it's going, it's chugging along. Like I don't
Yeah.
really know what to say. It's just a part of my life now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that when we first started, especially when we were interviewing guests, like I remember I would sit down and really like think about the questions, think about what I want to ask and like really like do a lot more prep for it. Whereas now I think with the guests, like we still give our guests questions and stuff to think about, but it doesn't require as much like advanced thinking on my part as it used to, which
Yeah,
is nice
I
because
think
then I don't have to, yeah, spend so much time.
it's like it's about sort of obsessing or going over the details a little bit less, being more okay with maybe something that is less than perfect. Whereas at the beginning, it was very hands on, every detail. You and I would exchange ideas about the titles, and we still sort of do, but like to a less extent. And then
Hmm.
descriptions. I mean, even in the beginning, we would send each other a draft of the episode to
Yeah.
listen to
Yeah. Yeah.
before
Yeah.
we're like, okay, yeah, publish it. Now it's like just fine.
Yeah. 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 No, I mean, I really enjoy that part because I think that just shows that we've grown and like we got more comfortable doing it. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
Well,
Okay.
what about do you speaking of stats, I think something that is quite relevant to that is one of my biggest takeaways actually is the idea I'm sure that everyone has heard of in some shape or form about how it's about the journey, it's about the process, and focus on what you
Mm-hmm.
can control, which is the process, your efforts, the
Mm-hmm.
results. It's not about the results. If you do it for the results, you're not doing it for the right reason, all of that, all that stuff. And I think that because we have had limited efforts, we've made limited efforts to market it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've necessarily seen a significant growth. We have a very loyal and steady, base of listeners, which we're really grateful for. But
Yeah.
because it hasn't sort of like certainly hadn't gone viral in any way or increased exponentially, it's really this whole project has really forced me to focus on the process. Because if I keep focusing on the result, if I keep refreshing, I'd be like, well, why did we used to have more listeners at one point, or why does this episode have more? And then it's like it's not steady. I thought we're improving, and then now we have less. So if I focus too much on the download count, on the listen count, I think that would just take away from the enjoyment of the process. And because it's been a very humble and sort of side project for us with a small audience, I think it's almost forced me to practice just focusing on the process rather than the result. And that's partly why I'm not refreshing the stats at all. And not trying to put too much onus on like, how this is how many people listen, it's grown, not grown, etc.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that whole thing? Because I know you got pretty excited today, for example, with the latest TikTok views.
Yeah.
Which is fine. That's legitimate, but
well, I think I've honestly always kind of focused on the process more than the results. I mean, it's fun,
Okay.
like when you see like,
Yeah.
oh, there's like a number, but I've always thought of this as a bit of a side project and like a creative outlet and something to, practice, like being in front of a camera and speaking and that type of thing. So I always saw that as that kind of project. And like, I know what kind of effort we're putting into this, and it's not like we are posting on social media every single day, and like not seeing results, because I feel like that would get pretty discouraging. So I guess my expectations of what this podcast would have been and has been aligns with what our current situation is. So to me, it's like expectation has met reality kind of thing.
Yeah.
Reality.
I mean, that's a sort of a good microcosm of some of the key differences between your personality and my personality, right? Where I am much more perfectionist than you, and so as a result, naturally, I was a bit more focused on the numbers and the results and the success, and whereas you are, the queen of knowing how to live happily and gratefully and joyfully, and big part of that is managing your expectations, and so knowing that you like that makes a lot of sense that you say that you had pretty realistic expectations, and so therefore things have sort of more or less chugged along pretty smoothly from your mindset.
And I think that's what like kind of motivates me to continue on still, is because like that was my expectation the whole time. It's being met, and so my expectation kind of continues to be that way, and so that's kind of like my motivation for continuing it. I think if I had really high expectations and they were not being met, then I think my motivation would just be like, whew, like,
that's definitely something that I think I struggle with, and I can learn from you, right? A good analogy is that I have had many experiences in life where I think I've talked about this in the past, where especially growing up, I often see very quick and successful results, and I'm not used to not seeing positive results quickly. I remember I was playing this League of Legends. A lot of people know this game. I used to play that a little bit, and then after a few months, I quit because I wasn't even to level 25 yet, which is like the baseline. Everyone who plays is at least level 25 because you only need to play a few months to get there. So I wasn't even at that baseline level, and then I quit, and then I was saying how I'm not good enough. And then my friend who I play with and is a seasoned player, she's like, you're at least as good as, if not better than, most people who have played the amount of time that you've played. Like, just keep at it. What do you expect from yourself? You've only been playing for a few months. You're doing much better than most people who've played for a few months.
Yeah.
But I think that's just my personality. And so with this podcast, that is something I've struggled with. Whereas it's like, oh, it's 43 episodes now. It's a year. Why hasn't it grown more? Why hasn't the audience count grown more? Like, I'm impatient to see those better results.
I mean, to me, it is just correlating with how much, effort we put into it. We do put in a lot of effort, like every week, like editing the podcast. It does take up a lot of time, but I still don't think that we've done what it maybe takes to get those viral views and everything like that. And part of my thinking also goes back to that book that I've mentioned so many times on the podcast, The Power of One More. And to me, like, I would be lying if I said that I don't want, our podcast to blow up. And so to me, it's like, okay, well, maybe one more episode, like the next episode will, help us get to virality. So,
Yeah.
you never know. I think as long as you still enjoy doing it and it's not
Yeah.
like doesn't feel like a burden, then I think that's good.
I know the idea of not attaching yourself to results too much. Just focus on the process and effort. Again, that's an age. That's a not a new idea. But a podcast I'm listening to right now, where Tim Ferriss is interviewing Arthur C. Brooks, who is this fairly famous. He writes the happiness sort of column in the Atlantic. And he quotes he mentioned a quote that I never heard of, but I quite liked. I think he attributed to the Dalai Lama. How do you pronounce
The
that?
Dalai Lama?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So apparently, it's basically it's very simple. It basically says intention without attachment. So you have the intention to do things, but you don't attach yourself to whether it works or not.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people who I introduce like stoicism to and stuff, they're like, well, it sounds like you just need to settle and be okay with being mediocre, but that's not it. It's you always want to strive for more. You always want to demand more of yourself, but you just have to be okay if it doesn't happen. But it doesn't mean you don't try. It doesn't mean you don't try for greatness. But when greatness doesn't happen to you, you don't have you can't feel less like you're not good enough.
It's kind of like a
So I really like
balance
that
of
intention without attachment.
yeah, it's kind of like being a balance of being grateful and satisfied with where you're at and like how far you've already come, but not being satisfied with that. Like you can be grateful but not completely satisfied, and you can continue to reach on, but you have to like also be in the moment, because if you're always thinking ahead, then you're not being mindful. So
You've
it,
talked about that a lot, even just off air between you and me. I know, like you've told me so many times because I've talked to you about my views, and then you're like, well, I think you've said something like, why can't you be really content and happy and grateful for what you have, but still want more?
mm-hmm.
Right? Do you know what I'm
Yep.
referring to? Like you're really
Yep.
good at that. I think where it's like it doesn't mean I don't have high self esteem or I'm not confident or happy with myself, but I think, yeah, again, I don't know how you do it.
Well, I tend to look at like all three. Like I tend to look at the past and the present and the future too. I know there's a lot of books and stuff that tell you to like only be in the present, or like, think about goals that you want. Don't look at the past. But I kind of like to look at all three because I kind of want to see where I came from, the journey, where I am now, and what I want to do in the future. I think the three go hand in hand, and you can't just focus on one thing. So that's kind of how I do it. Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's a lot of time just on that one concept. I think it's a big part of any project, any creative process that you set out on is are you seeing success or are you not? Whether you're starting a new YouTube channel, writing a book, and seeing if anyone buys it, so that's sort of a big part of my reflection on this process is realizing, it really is have to be about the journey and the process because you just don't know what the result's going to look like.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, success comes in different ways too, right? I feel like I found success in the podcast through learning how to edit a video, being more comfortable in front of the camera, speaking, that kind of thing, which kind of helps me out in my daily life. Learning through other people, through our guests. So I feel like I've found success in those ways. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about was how much I've enjoyed our conversations with just us two, but I think for you as well, like we've really enjoyed our conversations with our guests. And especially I feel like a lot of our friends that have come on or people that we haven't known very well, like we've gotten pretty like deep into whatever they wanted to talk about. And they've like really opened up. And to me, I just feel like honored, one, and then the other is like, damn, like I didn't know all these things about all these people, and the fact that they were willing to share with us and stuff, I think that's been pretty cool.
I think it's a good reminder, and I definitely agree, and it's a good reminder how every person, no matter how supposedly or insignificant or ordinary, right? It's just my friend, so and so, but everyone's got stories to tell, lessons to share, and life experiences to talk about that are interesting that we can learn from. Everyone has their own battle and everyone has their own journey, and then you don't have to be, a world famous person to have stories that can have impact when shared.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
I mean, I would argue that every single person has something unique that they can share on the podcast. I feel like it's funny because when I canvassed my friends about who could come onto the show, a lot of them and that have come on have been like, okay, like I would love to come on, but I don't know what to talk about.
Yeah.
Like my life
Yeah.
is, pretty. And then for me, I could like identify things right away in those people.
Yeah.
I'm like, but like this is unique to you. You could totally come on and talk about this. And they're like, oh yeah, like I guess that's different. I feel like a lot of people don't know this about themselves.
That's a great point. And I think that actually came up recently within a conversation with my partner, which is just this idea that it is almost necessary, if not at least helpful, for people close to you in your life to have those conversations where you can help each other understand what makes you unique and what your
Mhm.
strengths are. Because, for example, so again, I literally had this conversation with my partner. So one of the things, so I asked her, so like, oh, what's something that you think I excel at that maybe I don't realize? And then I think she said attention to detail. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I mean, I know that that's a strength, but the reason it's often helpful to ask other people this is because it's so ordinary to you, right? Like for
Mhm.
example, G, you're like, oh, I go to the gym every morning at 5. Like, what's the big deal? But everyone else keeps making a big deal, so that now you
Mhm.
realize, oh, I guess it's a big deal. But for me,
Yeah.
it's very normal because
Yeah.
we don't really know we know ourselves and we don't, but because we do know ourselves, oftentimes it's almost to the point where we don't realize what makes us special because we just think, oh, isn't everyone like this?
Yeah. Yeah. And it often is at the top of all your friends' heads. Like they know, they can identify that right away. Whereas you have to
Yeah.
like really think about it. You're like, what's so
Yes.
special about me? And your friends
Yeah,
can like
yeah.
pick it up right away.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's been, yeah, it's just been fun to like interview friends and people that we've connected through the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely one thing that I wrote down here that I really learned, which is that I mean, I think I had an idea about this, but it sort of reinforced the fact that I do really like interviewing people, asking questions and having conversations. I think for a long time, even before this podcast, I've toyed with oh, in another life, what could I be doing? And one
Yeah.
of those answers have often been maybe a journalist, maybe some sort of interviewer, because I love having conversations, asking people, learning things. I have pretty good writing skills. So like, oh, maybe I could be a journalist. But this podcast has definitely given me evidence that like, oh yeah, I really do like interviewing people.
Mm-hmm.
I think a big part of that is that I do know that I have a passion for elevating other people and shining light on other people. And that's always why I wish that hopefully sooner rather than later in my professional life, I'll have an opportunity to be in a leadership position. Because I think oftentimes it's leaders who, at least in my opinion, if you're a good leader is one that elevates and brings out the best in other people. It's just like servant leadership, right? That's what I strongly believe in. But I've never had a chance to be in that sort of position in my professional life.
Yeah.
But in a way, interviewing people on this podcast has been a way for me to elevate others and shine light on others. And I think that's what's been so rewarding for me because that's a core passion that I have.
Yeah. And I will say you're very good at it. You're very good at like reframing things. I think that's one of your skill sets. Like someone can say something and then you reframe it, and sometimes in a way better like light than they ever said. So I think like the fact that you have enjoyed doing that and pulling out a skill set that you haven't been able to use in your career is pretty cool.
Yeah. Is there anything from your end in terms of like something that you have found that you enjoyed or that you have learned or, along those lines?
I just enjoy chit-chatting, to be honest. So you know me, I like to shoot the shit and just have fun chatting. So yeah, I mean, aside from the ones that the interviews that we did, I like the ones where we just have casual chit chats. But I think like since season 2, we've implemented or like we've come out with some episodes that are focused on a specific topic or things that we've learned. And I think that's helped me think about the things that I'm reading or learning a little bit more, because I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to like bring this back to the podcast. Like it's made me think about topics that I don't really think about in my daily life or have really put a focus on.
Well, I will say that, and I think Mia might have mentioned this in passing once or twice before, but especially early on, one of the things that I really wanted you to do more was to give chime in and share your thoughts and your opinions and your
Hmm.
ideas. And I think you're a relatively agreeable person, which is
Yeah.
nice. It's why you have so many friends and I don't. You're very pleasant and it's very easy and you don't have like strong, like I remember one time we were driving in your car and I was like ranting about my office's work from home policy or something. And
Uh-huh.
then you were talking about yours and then you also had a policy or something, I don't know, anyway, something that you're like, yeah, I don't like that or whatever, I agree. And then so it's like the same source of analytically and logically, yeah, it's something that we don't agree with, but I respond a lot more emotionally to that and into that perceived injustice or lack of reason, whereas for you
Hmm.
you're like, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not great, but okay, I don't think about it. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
That sounds familiar. What
Yeah.
so would you say you're a person that's like that can adapt to change well?
I'm not sure.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if it's a strength or a weakness. Yeah, why do you put it that way?
I just that just came to mind because I was just thinking about this recently while I was on the toilet, and I was like thinking, I was like, I feel like I'm a good, because often like those kinds
Oh,
of
I think I
topics
know
come
what
up
you
at
mean.
work and stuff, and it's like,
Mm.
are you someone that can adapt to change well? And I just randomly thought of it. I'm like, I think I'm a type of person that can like adapt to change quickly and well. Like I'm not the type to be like harping on the old stuff and be like, this is how we've always done it and I want to be able to do this, and like um when changes in policy and changes and stuff like that. I don't know, it's just something
I would
random
say
that I
that
thought of.
there's a key idea that I love that I think is very relevant, if not exactly what this is about, which is
Hmm.
the idea of, do we resist reality or do we accept it? Are we like Bruce Lee? Are we like water? Do we flow and go with the flow,
Yeah.
or do we resist? Oh, I don't like this.
Or like
So I think,
questioning it, like
yeah, or
why.
questioning it, yeah, exactly, or why, like, or give me the reason why is it like this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
you're really good at not resisting reality.
Mm,
As in like, oh, this is how it is, and even if you don't like it, you're like, well,
it is what it is.
it is what it is, so let's not get too hung up on it, right? Yeah, again,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
to you it's like, yeah, obviously that's how else do you react, but I think a lot of people, at least for people like me, it's not like that. And so the reason I bring this up is because or actually I don't know if this relates, but my original point was, I think early on I wanted you to share more of your thoughts, and maybe because you're someone who is more agreeable and less not angry, but like feeling emotional about certain
Emotionally
things.
charged.
um
Yeah.
yeah, then you're a lot of things are like, yeah, it's I don't have that much more to add or something like that.
Mm-hmm,
And I
mm-hmm,
think you've
mm-hmm.
gotten, at least for the purposes of this podcast, I definitely think that that's something that has improved. Not, I don't say improved, but you know what I mean. Like, I think you've been a lot more
I would take that as a
comfortable
compliment. Yes.
yeah, and engage in sharing your thoughts and having opinions on things that maybe you otherwise didn't feel the need to share. But it's a
Yeah.
podcast, so we gotta hear your opinions.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's like one of my goals. So the fact that you think that there has been an improvement, that's awesome. I appreciate that. And I think that's true. Yeah, like, and at the start of the podcasts, I think you led a lot of the conversations, like, leading up to like um the background and everything like that. And as we've had guests who are maybe, my friends or whatever, I felt more comfortable like leading those
Yeah,
conversations. So
I have to
it's
say, I was listening to Joy's episode, right, that just came out a few weeks ago, and I think you should be really proud of how you sort of carried that conversation and facilitated and led it. I don't think you would have been able to do it like that
mm,
if Joy came on in episode 6, 7, or 8.
yeah, yeah, no, I agree. Wow, this is like a debrief session
Well, that's
between
why I said
between the two of
it's somewhat
yeah,
self-indulgent, but
yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah, we're
yeah,
reflecting on like how we've changed, how we've learned, and what
yeah.
we've taken away from the pod.
Yeah.
Um, well,
I,
sorry, you want to?
I guess surprise about either doing a podcast or like the behind the scenes of doing the podcast. Like what was something that you didn't think was going to happen or was the case with starting a podcast and you were like, oh, I never knew.
Uh, hmm.
I mean, I can start.
Yeah,
I can share one
yeah. Why don't
if
you start? I don't have one off the top of my head.
it's like it's the editing process, I think. I really didn't think that it would take as much time as it does. I mean, granted that in the beginning we did more editing and we were really meticulous about all the ums and the ands and tried to cut all of those out. But podcasting is not just about the recording. In fact, like that's the
That's like
that's
the smallest portion of time. Yeah.
exactly into getting a podcast up. Everything from writing descriptions to thinking of title names. It's the back end process that actually takes so much time. So, tip or reflection for whoever is thinking about starting a podcast. Like there is a lot of behind the scenes work that needs to be done.
I think so. I think that's probably definitely my biggest surprise or biggest learning point too, logistically behind the scenes. I guess on the other end, or not sort of not thinking logistically, but something that was I guess I didn't know if I expected it to happen or not, but it has happened, which is just the the level of interest and it comes up a lot. As I said, every time I connect with someone that I haven't seen for a little bit, or even if I have, it's sort of like the first and only interesting question to ask. It's like, oh, how's your podcast going? And all the times it's people who don't really listen regularly, but they know that it's a project I'm doing. And I guess to ask because, they're nice people and they support me. And so they're like, oh, I know this is something you're working on. Like, how's that going?
It's also one of those things that can like stir up like a discussion now rather than being like, what trips are you going on in the coming months?
Yeah, exactly. Excuse me. And so I guess I didn't really expect that to be arguably the most interesting thing about my life now, but it is.
Yeah.
It's the most interesting thing that I have to share. And it's in a way, it's like, that's kind of nice. It's kind of nice to have something like this that I can be like, yeah, that's something I do that is interesting that most people don't do. And I think it would be nice to have more of that in my life. Maybe, I don't know, other projects too. But yeah, because I think majority of people, right? You go to work, you go home, you do your chores. Maybe you have a class or two on the side, but what do people do? You play sports, you go dance, you do boxing. That's it, right? It's not like, oh, I'm learning to fly a plane. Like, that'd be kind of interesting. But but if you come up to me like, oh, I'm writing a book, I'm like, oh, I don't know anyone who's writing a book.
Yeah.
Podcast, like, oh, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. It's like you finally have one of those answers to the question, like, what do you think is the most interesting thing about you? Like,
yes, exactly. Yeah. Something that most people do not have in their life. Even if you're, again, like, I'm training for a marathon. I know so many people who are training for marathons.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't mean that I'm not saying that, oh, this makes me better than others. Not at all. That's not my point. My point is just like, oh, it's surprising to me. I didn't realize that this would become a relatively unique thing that I can share about what's going on in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the pleasantly surprising things is how much like discussion it's generated like between my friends and stuff about the different podcast episodes. Sometimes we debate about the topics and what people have said, which is really cool. And I think also conversations that we've been able to have, like the range of different topics that we've covered. Like, a couple weeks ago we were talking about dating, but it's like we've covered so many topics that I wouldn't have thought that, like, it just wouldn't have occurred to me that we would talk about those things ever. So, yeah.
A quick note I have about the time thing, I guess, while you have mentioned it in terms of how much time it takes. So I did note here that, yeah, it does take a lot of time, but it's also more or less like a non-negotiable. And in the sense that you might say, oh, buying groceries and cookies is non-negotiable, exercising is a non-negotiable, sleeping on time is non-negotiable. But this really is, in a way, because it's a partnership. I think that's why I was trying to think, like, why is this such a non-negotiable? I guess if it's my own podcast, it's just much easier to not post a week when I'm supposed to. But it's accountability to each other and respect for each other, and it sort of forces me to do something even when I have no time. Like today, I don't have any time for this, but it's just like I gotta do it, so I gotta do it, right? And so it and the bigger picture of what that means is I reflect on. I guess this relates to Kim's episode where she says it's not that you don't have time, or the best way to prioritize is just to recognize that you choose what you spend your time doing, and when you don't have time, it's because you chose not to do it.
Yeah. That's a really great point. Because the truth is we do have time, or we can make time for the things that
we make time
are non-negotiables. Because, for example, if we ever stop doing this podcast and we think about how many hours that we spent on this podcast each week,
exactly.
For example, 10, like we have those 10 hours. So moving forward, you can't really be like, well, if it's something that's important to you, you can't be like, I can't find the 10 hours. It's like, well, you did when you had the podcast.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
No, that's good.
Well, I want to share sort of one of my favorite parts about this experience, and this sort of relates to hearing people ask me about it and knowing that there are people who listen. So the best part, I think, about this whole experience so far this past year for me has been I don't have to even just hear about it from people, but just knowing, based on the stats anyway, that there are people out there who have, however small numbers they are, who have spent valuable time in their life consuming something that you and I created. That it's this thing that literally did not exist in this world until we put it into this world, until we molded it out of nothingness, this conversation, and put it out there.
Yeah.
And that it has added, hopefully more often than not, added value to someone's life and added content to the world. It's that's very, very cool. And I can just imagine, it just makes me realize how rewarding it would be if in the future I finally get to publishing a book, publishing a board game. It would be so rewarding to know, wow, there are so many people out there whose lives have been not improved, but like people have been able to spend their life in an enjoyable way.
Yeah.
Because of something I created from my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of weird to put it that way, but that's the most rewarding part, I think.
Yeah. And value,
just one person.
And value in all different aspects. Like it could have been value that, something that you learned from one of our guests or from us. It could be value from like entertainment. Just, we're fun to listen to. Like, you might be stressed on one day and then you listen to one of our podcasts and it's like a fun catch up between friends.
Warm
like
cup of chocolate.
Yeah, it brings you some sort of entertainment or value, like relatability. Like if you heard something that you can relate to and you're like, oh, I'm not the only one who feels like that. There's so many different types of value I think that it's bringing people, and that's awesome. And people keep coming back too, which is nice because we have a lot of repeat listeners. So it's like, okay, well, you must like us to some degree.
yeah. Unless they're like, I don't know, for some reason being like forced to listen to it.
Yeah, I think the coolest part also is like, I mean, obviously, like my close friends are so supportive and it's like the best. But sometimes you get like the people that you wouldn't have expected or you didn't really realize listen, and it's like they'll reach out and they'll be like, hey, I've been listening to a lot of your podcasts. I'm like, wow, you have? Like, we don't really talk, or like I don't know you but you've been listening, which is so cool.
I remember a few months ago at my work Christmas party, I sat down and I just happened to sit down, and across from me was another colleague that I haven't really spoken to for a long time. And then she's like, oh, I haven't talked to you for a while. Like, how's it going? It's like, oh, I listened to some of your podcasts. And I was like, wait, what? He did it? He's like, oh,
Yeah.
did I never tell you?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it was very flattering, but also, yeah, it's kind of surreal. It's like, oh, this person I don't know really well spent a few hours listening to me talk.
Yeah.
It's like, oh,
And they
kinda,
know so much about us now. Like there's a lot that we've shared on the podcast and they know a lot about me. Yeah, like same with my coworker. I was behind her one day walking into work and I called her and she couldn't hear me. She had her AirPods in and then once we got in the elevator she saw me. She's like, "Hey, I'm listening to you right now." Like you're in
that's
my
so
ear.
weird.
Yeah.
Isn't that so weird? That is
She
so
listens
weird.
every week on the bus, which is so cool.
Yeah.
Shout out to you, Jenna, if you're listening. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to touch upon something that I don't know. Yeah, I'm curious if you have any thoughts or if you agree. But when you go, you know how there's often advice about how, oh, don't don't mix business and pleasure or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't really unpacked this with you before, but I want to quickly touch upon it because I know there's a lot of other things I still want to get to. But
Yeah.
this podcast has influenced, for better or worse, and that's, I guess we can talk about it, has influenced our friendship.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's an interesting thing to unpack, not just because you're talking you and I, but for other people who are listening right now. It's like when you enter into some project, or most commonly a business, with a friend, with a partner, it really changes the dynamic of it, I think. And it's not just I mean, we don't have any financial stakes right now, but even socially. And I'll give you a quick example. So like, for example, when we first opened up this podcast recording, and I saw Yuji, and then, you know, my natural instincts were like, oh, I know you went out last night. I want to know how it's going. But
Yeah.
then I'm like, oh, wait, is there an interesting story there? Should I wait to talk
Yeah.
to you about it on air?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because if anything else, I feel like we're more business partners than friends now than we used to be. Before, we would text more about our life. Be like, how's it going? I would like text you randomly about stuff. But now almost every single interaction I have with you
Conversation
is about the pod.
Yeah, that's true.
And
I never
to be
thought about
frank,
that.
I kind of what's the word? I kind of lament the change in our friendship. To be honest.
I mean, in some ways, yes, but also I feel like we are catching up more than we used to because we have the pod.
Oh,
right?
That's true. Oh yeah, I'm talking to you way more than I used to in the past.
Yeah, like every single week, and we always do these like catch ups, you know, before the podcast we'll like catch up a little bit. So I feel like, yeah.
But I guess it's because of the nature of the podcast that I find I wonder like, oh, I want to know about what's going on, but we should save it for the pod. Or like I see you, you know, at a mutual friend gathering, and then you're talking about your vacation. I'm like, la 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 la, don't tell me. I need to act surprised when you tell me about it on the podcast.
Yeah.
Or like the other day you were telling me about how you got food poisoning, right? On the pod, but I already knew. But for the purposes of the pod, I'm like, well, I gotta pretend or act like I don't really know. Otherwise, it's not that interesting. I gotta be like, oh, no way, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It is an interesting dynamic because, like, we don't see each other that often, like, or hang out that often. But yeah, in the sense that when we do hang out, like, we can't talk like friends anymore because we were like, okay, save it for the podcast. Or like a lot of the stuff, it's like, oh, I already knew. I already know these things because like the podcast, like you already shared it on the podcast and stuff. Yeah. Did you ever think about that before the podcast? Because I didn't. Like, I didn't think about the implications of like,
no, I didn't,
doing this like with a friend, I think.
No.
So yeah.
And the other thing is like, and maybe you feel this less because you're such much more of a agreeable person, and you know, but in planning this, marketing it, topics, planning, everything, there have been times, you know, almost on a weekly basis, and there's nothing wrong with this, where we would bounce ideas back and forth about things. And as is the nature of any brainstorming, we don't always see eye to eye on everything. We're like, oh, what clip should we post? What title should we use? What topic should we have? And I think that has brought in more, again, more business like conversations into of a relationship that in the past is just for fun,
Yeah, that is interesting. Cause like
right?
because yeah, we wouldn't have those kinds of, I mean,
Disagreements.
disagreements as like
Yeah,
friends previously.
exactly. So like now we're working on something where the stake is a little bit higher than it would otherwise be. I think the closest that you could get to this as friends is if you go travel together and you're like planning your
Mm,
itinerary, or like you're
mm-hmm,
troubleshooting some sort of emergency or crisis where
mm-hmm,
the stakes are higher because you're both spending a lot of time and money on this
mm-hmm,
trip. But it's
mm-hmm.
not often that two friends would have disagreements over something substantive, because usually it's just, okay, I don't live with you, you're not my partner, it's whatever, right?
Yeah. I think I've subconsciously been able to separate the two. Now that I'm just
Okay,
thinking about it,
maybe I have not as
I
much.
feel like I've been able to separate the two in the sense that everything when we're not seeing each other is like business, you know, because like everything that we talk about over text or whatever is now business. And
Uh,
everything, every time that we see each other, we're talking in like a friend group or whatever, that's
yeah.
all friendship. But I didn't think about that before we just had a conversation about it. But I think like subconsciously
Oh,
I've
interesting.
separated that somehow.
Interesting.
Um I will say like there hasn't been any I guess disagreement or conflicts about like responsibilities. Like somehow it just naturally, to me anyway, it just kind of naturally worked out in terms of like, you know, who's going to like edit for the week or who's gonna do this or that for the week. I feel like we've never really,
Yeah.
it just naturally worked. Like I guess we know like
Yeah.
if you edited the last two or whatever, I'll do the next one, and vice
Yeah.
versa, and we
Yeah.
covered each other off really well. So
Yeah.
in that sense, I'm
It's
pleasantly
something that I
surprised.
think we're lucky. I think that it's
Yeah,
been pretty
balanced
easy,
workload.
smooth sailing in that way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay. Damn, I still have so many points, but
Keep
what
going. You have all these
really?
points. Keep going. I did have
um.
points, but like I feel like you're gonna cover them. So
Well,
um,
I want to say. What else do I want to say? Oh, a quick reflection is that I think uh, early on, especially if you look at episode one, well, we recorded something that's longer and then we cut it half. And then the first half we posted as episode one, the second half we posted as episode two. But I think the idea was always, oh, we should make episodes that are like around 20-40 minutes, something pretty. We're going on 47 minutes now, probably less the
yeah,
published version if we edit it lightly, but we're coming up on an hour. And it's just funny how I think even to this day, if you ask us, well, how long should our episodes be? They don't have to be more than half an hour. But it's just
yeah.
always,
That
oh
never
yeah, it's an hour.
happens.
We gotta
Never
wrap up. We gotta
happens.
wrap up.
Yeah, never happens. Along the same lines, or something that I wanted to talk to you mention was that in our first few episodes, we were really like kind of scatterbrained. Like we were kind of all over the place in terms of what we are going to talk about. And I think they used to be all sort of our quote unquote uncut episodes or like our casual conversations. But I was like, dang, like looking back, we were talking about like conspiracy theories and like just such random
UFOs,
topics.
yeah,
Yeah, like dating shows. Like it would span. I think we
Netflix.
have some more focus now, in particular because we have guests. So yeah, I think that just the past few I think have been my favorites.
Well, I don't know if this is going to go on for too long. I'll try and be concise, but I want to share kind of the episodes that have had particular significance for me and maybe highlight
Mm-hmm.
some for listeners if you haven't listened to all of them. Obviously I recommend all of them, but some have more impact on me than others, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe the ones everyone's different, right? But I mean, the first episode for sure is a milestone for us, and I think it's today still our most listened to episode, which makes sense because everyone who's curious about it was like, oh, let me just take a look at episode one. Which I realize now in hindsight, we should have maybe realized that and put. I don't know if we should put more effort, but just what I mean. Like our
Yeah,
first episode, if you ask me, like, oh, rank our best content amongst
I
our first
know.
10 episodes. Episode one would be pretty down there because
I
we
know.
we were just talking crap and it wasn't
Yeah,
even that interesting, but
yeah.
it was our most. So let's just put it this way: there are many people who perhaps listened a few minutes or more to our first episode and never listened to anything else,
Yeah. Well,
right?
yeah.
But objectively speaking. And I just wonder if we had known that the first episode was that important to retaining listeners who are curious, we would have come out firing a little bit more strongly than just be like, hey, so how was your vacation?
Yeah, I know. I think about that too sometimes because I look at the stats and I'm like, that's our most listened to one, and then I'll go back and listen to it and I'm like, oh man,
this is not even that good and interesting.
yeah. So I'm glad that your sister Brenda's episode is high on the rankings too, because that's obviously another listen to one. Yeah.
The second episode that stood out to me is obviously the first guest one. That was with Audrey, episode 6. To date, still one of our, I don't know, still, she's very articulate and funny and dynamic person. So I think that was a milestone for us, our first guest one. And yeah, I think at that point we didn't know that it would be a more regular thing. Perhaps mostly due to my efforts that it's become so regular, but that was pretty big. Episode 8, where Olivia interviews us, called G and David Put on the Spot. I think that's actually a meaningful one too for me because of the format and the content, and listening back to it, it really showed me how this could work. And what I mean by that is,
because we're so different.
Yeah, exactly. What I mean by that is, hey, we're pretty different, and given the right context and situation, it's mildly entertaining and interesting.
Yeah.
And so that's where I was like, okay, maybe we have something that could, work here, where your personality really bounces off mine because of the differences. And I think I was, from that, I learned that really works quite well, because I listened to it, I'm like, oh, this is pretty entertaining.
Yeah.
Episode 10 you mentioned with my sister is one of our most listened to guest ones. I don't know if it's coincidental, but it was also right after episode 10 that I first and only time I ever posted on my socials about my podcast, about our podcast. Yeah. So I think at that time, everyone's like, oh, all my high school friends who probably still hasn't talked to me, they're like, oh, David has a podcast, let me check it out.
Yeah.
And that was like the most recent episode.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it was also still to date, perhaps one of the episodes where the content aligned with our guests, like fairly legitimate expertise.
Like professionally.
Yeah, professional expertise, because a lot of times we just talk about sort of life experiences, which is no less valuable, but it's just different. It's more like there's no right or wrong, it's just this person's experience. Whereas with my sister talking about childcare and whatnot, that was quite substantive and interesting. So I think we're quite proud of that episode.
Yeah.
How did you enjoy your solo episodes? Because for me, my solo episode, I think, is something that I'm quite proud of in terms of just, sharing the narrative in the way that I did. And I got some good feedback about it. So I think that's something that that stood out to me as a personal achievement.
Well, when I did my solo episode, I think something that I found is that it's challenging to do a solo episode. I didn't realize how challenging it would be, because a lot of episodes, or a lot of podcasts that I listen to are solo podcasters. Like they're just talking for the entire duration. Yeah, they're just talking, right? It's like a self-reflection type of thing. But it is hard because you don't have anyone asking you questions. You don't have anyone to talk back and forth with. So you have to essentially do like a monologue. I find it fun, but definitely outside of like it being like as easy as just us talking.
Yeah. There are just 3 more episodes that really stood out to me that I want to highlight. Episode 30 with Samson, because he was, I think, to date, our first and only guest we've had on where neither of us have known him previously. He was almost a quote unquote a professional connection because of the podcast. He reached out and then we've connected, but I've never met him. He's not someone I know in my personal life.
Yeah.
And to that point, I think that's sort of, I was reflecting on like our next steps, right? And that's actually one of the things that I think, I don't know if we have concrete plans to do, but certainly it is a thing that we can do, which is try and have guests on that are not someone that we personally know already.
Yeah.
Like send an invitation out, right?
Yeah.
To someone. And I think that's quite scary and daunting to me anyway, we haven't really done that. But, with Samson, it's someone that we haven't met personally in lives before. So interviewing a guest like that was pretty interesting milestone.
Yeah. It does feel like the next milestone in a podcast career is interviewing people that you don't actually know.
Yeah, exactly.
We can dream.
Episode 31 with Callan right after that actually was really significant to me
Yeah.
for the reason that I mentioned earlier, which is I just love if I feel like I'm able to shine light on other people and elevate other people. I mean, that for obvious reasons, I felt hopefully, and I think she agrees, that it was such a great opportunity to give voice to someone who maybe oftentimes doesn't feel like they have as much of a voice.
Yeah.
So that was very meaningful for me, and not just for the fact that I've known this person her whole life and my whole life.
Yeah, that episode made me smile a lot. I think just listening to your interaction with her and like the way that you can connect with her that was very just heartwarming. I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And selfishly, in terms of what I'm working on in my own life, I have to say Kim's episode is the one that, like, if I were a third party person listening to the podcast, that episode would be the one that is my favorite, because it's had the most personal impact on me, because she's all about just going after it and doing it and being bold and not giving, like, not letting fear of failure stop you and stuff. And she's really been someone who has emulated all those characteristics of living life to the fullest and stuff. And I don't remember the details now, but I just remember after having that conversation, I've personally felt so motivated to be like, all right, David, no excuses. Let's go do the thing.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I think
I really like that episode.
That might be like one of my definitely in my top 3 episodes, because I think I did feel very like inspired afterwards. Like,
yeah. So
wow.
anyone that's listening to this that has not listened to one, I mean, again, listen to all of them, but I mean, can I play anyway, it's my podcast. I can say anything I want. Do listen to that, because it's just so, there's some really good messages in there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah, so that's some of the top ones that I wanted to give a quick shout out to, that had more meaning and sort of milestones, I think, for us.
You didn't shout out our UFO episode. All right. Let me see where it ranks on your... That is interesting. Okay.
So I'll ask you this question, and because I had the answer is something I want to share, which is, and we touched upon this earlier. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I didn't. But how would you feel differently if this podcast had 1,000 listeners, which obviously we do not right now? How would you feel differently about it?
I don't think I'd feel differently about it, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, I don't like, I used to at the start of our podcast, I used to always think like, oh my gosh, like there's people listening to it. So like, do I want to say this? Do I not want to say this? Like who's going to be listening to it? Like I thought about that a little bit more, but I think I kind of just forgot about all of that later on in the podcast. Like I kind of forgot that I didn't forget that there's listeners, but I kind of got used to it, that there's like people listening to us talk out there, and things that you say can be relatable to people. And I just stopped like dwelling on it as much, I think. So now if we have, all these listeners, I think I'd kind of feel the same.
And I think that's, again, so yeah, this relates back to our earlier process over results thing. But I think that's what's amazing about you, and what I still need to find a way to embrace, because I've asked myself this question and I realized that my answer is not your answer. I think it's basically, it's like, would I enjoy this project more and be more enthusiastic about it if our listener count, increased by 10, increased by 50? And I think the answer for me is yes. Because if you ask me, like, I'm struggling with like finding a bigger purpose in my life, right? I go to my job and stuff, but it's like, I want to work towards something that I care about, that's meaningful. Well, putting content out there, whether it's with guests or without guests in this podcast, I think is very meaningful. If there are people listening out there that whose lives are, if at the very least entertained, if not improved by our conversations, that's great. And so if let's not even just 1,000, let's say 5,000 or 10,000. If our podcast had 10,000 listeners, I actually would feel very comfortable being like, well, this podcast is my life's purpose. And so because of that reflection, I realized, David, you're not doing this for the right reasons.
We definitely do
Right?
see it a different way then,
Yeah.
because to me, it's like if I can bring value, like if I can be of entertainment to like one person, that's enough for me.
And
Maybe
we
my
definitely
maybe I
do.
just need to maybe I just need to raise my expectations or something. I don't know, but because this is how I see it as a side project, a
Yeah.
creative outlet for me. To
Yeah.
me, it's like if I can bring some kind of value to a few people,
Yeah.
that will kind of fill my heart.
And I think that's honestly, and that's why I said I think you got it right, right? That's the way to think about it. And I think, and I'm just being very honest with my reflection right now in terms of, oh, this is actually how I feel, this is how I see it. And my honest reflection is that I don't think I it's not right, or I don't know what's the word, but it's not ideal that I feel this way, that I think this way, that, oh, if only this podcast had like 10,000 listeners, 50,000 listeners, I would feel like I matter more, and that I have, this great purpose, that my life is important to this world.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm reflecting on that. I'm like, oh, I do feel differently because our audience is not, it's not, a top 10 podcast in Canada. And I realize, because that is true, that's how I feel right now. I think the fact is I need to find a way to change that, because of everything we talked about, process over results. I'm not approaching it with the right mindset, if that is how I feel.
I don't think, no, I would disagree with that. I don't think it's a bad
Really?
thing to have like large goals or to like reach for the stars. But I think what's different then is that like we need to
You're
put in the
content.
work. No.
Oh,
Like
you
we
put in
need to
work.
put in the work to get there. Like I don't think that's not
That's true.
achievable, right? But I think we need to put in more work than we are now to get to that level. But if that's the goal, I don't think that's unreasonable. Like,
That's such an interesting point that you made, and an interesting response, because here I'm just sitting and be like, oh, I'm not doing it for the right reasons, but yeah,
no,
you're
not
right.
at
It's
all.
like,
That surprises me. No. Like I think having big
I just
goals.
need to work. I just need to work at it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't just,
You
put
can't
in
just
a
expect.
mediocre few hours and then expect to be someone super influential, not influential, but like,
Yeah.
impactful.
Yeah. Which is why I've said that the reality meets my expectations, because we have put in the work. I know how much work we've put in, and the reality kind of matches that. Unless we get
Mhm.
lucky and we have this viral
Yeah.
video go off, right?
Yeah,
But
in which case, that's the great word for it. In which case, if we had suddenly become much more impactful in terms of the volume and the listeners, I can't take credit for that. That's just luck.
well,
I
it's
mean,
luck.
I take credit for putting out something that is of enough quality that it could go viral. But the fact that it went viral in the hypothetical situation is not due to anything that I had control over. So I can't take credit for it, even if it does.
I would argue it is, though, because if you put out 1,000 videos now, you kind of make your luck, right? It goes back to what Jonathan said.
Yeah, which is our next episode.
Yeah, is it luck or is it work?
Oh no, it's not. It's the
the
previous
episode,
episode.
just-
Based
yeah.
on the episode
Yeah.
that we just
It's like,
published
is it
last
luck
week.
or is it
Yeah.
work
How
that
much
you
luck
put
is
in?
in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
interesting.
I think the bottom line is that we are very lucky and very blessed for everyone who has spent time with us this past year, whether it's one episode or every episode. Yeah, we're very lucky, and I feel very sincere, and maybe this is hypocritical based on what I just said, but every single person that listens, it's something that I'm really grateful for. I guess it's just you put in a lot of work. And it's for myself, I hope that I will have as much impact as possible with that work. But yeah, I shouldn't discount every single person that does find value in it.
Like I said from the start, you can appreciate what you have and still want more. Two things can be true at the same time. Yeah. I guess maybe we should spend a bit of time talking about our future. Unless you have more. Unless you have more you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, we can pivot to the future.
Okay. Yeah. So, what does our future look like, David? Crystal ball.
Okay. Well, I can talk about it. So, it's a year now. We've been doing this project for a year, with the exception of a couple breaks here and there. It's been weekly, as I said, 43 episodes in 1 year. That's almost every week.
Yeah.
Even with our most interested and loyal listeners, I know that it's quite a lot to be caught up on your podcasts, your favorite podcasts that releases every week. I know, like, for example, my sister, right? Like, of course she listens and she supports, and she's like, "Oh, I'm behind. I'm like 3 weeks behind."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm sure, while maybe not everyone's like that, I realize, yeah, weekly episodes might not be something that
sustainable.
how do I say this? Yeah, sustainable for perhaps the listeners, but also for me. And I'll just speak for myself. Having done this for a year now, it's just it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of time, and there's other, life is all about balancing, right? As Kim's episodes, it's a balance act. And so I think what we've agreed to moving forward is essentially pivoting to a bi-weekly release schedule. And one of the main things that at least for me, that I think this new schedule will allow us to do is to continue, if not improve, the quality and of the content and the content itself. Because there's many times where I feel like, because of our weekly schedule, we've got to put something out there. And hopefully you'll agree, if you're listening, that more often than not, it ends up being something interesting and substantive, and something that you can take away that makes you think in your life. But it's oftentimes it's a struggle. And I don't want to be a content creator that puts something out for the sake of it. And sometimes it's like that, especially with a weekly episode. So hopefully if we pivot to a bi-weekly one, we can keep putting out things that we're passionate about, that we're proud of, and we care a lot about. And at the same time, it gives you more time to keep up to date with our episodes.
Yeah.
So bi-weekly, that's basically the long and short of it.
Yes.
Hopefully that's okay with everyone. It's like, no, it's not okay. Get back on the horse.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. We committed a lot in our first year, and like, I think I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to put into it. So yeah, I mean, we'll try it out and we'll see how it goes, right?
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, trial run. See how it goes. Hopefully this way, maybe we'll have more time to post on social media and some of our other avenues. And yeah, we'll just give us a bit more breathing room, which is always nice. So
yeah. Anything else you want to add to that, or anything else about the future?
Well, we're still always looking for guests, and so if you are someone who hasn't been on our podcast yet and are interested, and reach out to us.
Or if you even just be like, hey, can you guys talk about this or that? Like, let us know if there's something you want us to chat about, or find someone to talk about it with.
Yeah.
I know at least this is one of the things I wrote down, which is one of probably the biggest topic that we should really talk about, or two related that we haven't talked about, is housing, renting, buying, home maintenance, all that kind of stuff. And related to that is financial investments, financial health, financial investing.
Yeah.
So all basically money related stuff. We haven't really talked about money related stuff, other than G needs to stop Uber eating, but that's not really it. That's only scratches the surface of financial responsibility.
Damn, dude.
So I mean, that's definitely a topic that, we haven't had a guest, I think, or we haven't been able to think of a guest that we know that could speak relatively authoritatively or legitimately to the topic of buying homes or financial investments. We all know a little bit because we do that in our own lives. Like G's bought a place, I have and I think we both have our respective investment portfolios and stuff. But I don't feel
like it wouldn't want to be an anecdote of our situations. Like it's more like we want some advice,
someone with a bit more expertise. Yeah. So anyway, stuff like that, and bring on guests that maybe we don't know and that we've invited. Things to aspire to. Yeah.
If you have topic ideas, I mean, I have also been pleasantly surprised at how last minute we've been able to come up with some topics that actually was fun to talk about sometimes. But it'd be nice to have a like a parking lot of all these topics that we could draw from. So
let us know if you want to come on. Even if you don't want to come on, let us know what we should talk about. And if you don't want to do either of those things, please at least give us a 5-star rating on Spotify. There's 21 ratings on Spotify. I know for a fact that even though our audience is small, it's not that small. So at least half of you have not give us a rating. Anyway,
Please,
so
it's free.
Yeah, I'm
I'm
just
kidding. Yeah.
I feel I mentioned here, this will be my last point, which is I always feel very tacky doing the spiel because I think I still have imposter syndrome. I'm like, oh, like who are we and why does it matter and stuff? But
Yeah.
it helps us spread the love, spread the word. So if you haven't already, give us a review on Apple Podcasts, give us a rating, share it with a friend. If you listen every week, there's probably someone else that would also enjoy listening to us every week. But as we spent at least half this episode today talking about, it doesn't matter. It's about the process, David. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, anyways, on that note, because we are doing bi-weekly episodes now, the next episode will go up February 19th instead of the 12th. So, yeah, you can look forward to bi-weekly episodes moving forward. Well, I think we'll end it there. And hope everyone has a good rest of the couple weeks until we're back again. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, congratulations to us. Again, a somewhat self-indulgent episode. I don't know how far everyone made it through, but 1 year. Damn. 1 year.
Very cool. Commitment. Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Well,
bye.
here's another year, maybe. Hopefully. We'll see.
Yeah. Woohoo.
Okay.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.